All right, welcome to part two of episode 13 of Dimwits, Dipshots, Dufuses, and Dullards. And I was talking about Joe Biden as the fetid fever dream flashback of the week. And where I left off before I had a coughing spell was I was talking about Joe Biden's legacy in Afghanistan. And I decided, once I had to take a break because of the coughing spell, I'll actually make this a two-part episode. So I was talking about Ryan Cooper of the American Prospect. He had written an article titled Joe Biden's Senseless Economic Strangulation of Afghanistan. And, I was talking about the $7 billion in Afghanistan central bank reserves being frozen by Joe Biden. It was, as Ryan Cooper noted, disastrous news for ordinary Afghans who are facing mass unemployment, drought, high inflation, and food shortages, if not outright starvation, by the millions. And according to a recent report, fully 97% of the country's population is now in poverty. So Ryan Cooper goes on to note that families are selling their children for food, and Biden's decision is both foolish and barbaric. It will accomplish nothing in the fight against terrorism and cause certain terrible suffering. If he had any sense, he'd take quiet steps to allow Afghanistan to a measure of economic recovery. So that's the end of me quoting him for now. Um, Oddly enough, I could find very few updated articles on this topic. I did find a piece in The Guardian by Nina Lacani and Emma Graham Harrison. It's from a few years ago, though. But anyway, the Guardian article notes that, quote, Joe Biden signed an executive order releasing $7 billion in frozen Afghan reserves to be split between humanitarian efforts for the Afghan people and American victims of terrorism, including relatives of 9/11. They quote Adam Weinstein, a research fellow at the Quincy Institute, who also served as a U.S. Marine in Afghanistan. Weinstein said, quote, the 9/11 victims deserve justice, but not from the Afghan people, who themselves became pawns caught in the middle of the U.S. led war on terror and an oppressive Taliban regime. And he continues, the idea that overnight the central bank reserves went from belonging to the Afghan people to being the transferable property of the United States is nothing short of colonial. And that's something I would agree with. That article is titled Biden releases $7 billion in frozen Afghan funds to split between 9/11 families and aid. So really, that money should have all gone to the Afghan people, but Joe Biden decided instead to sort of arbitrarily divvy that money up and give some of it to the 9/11 families. And that might sound good to a lot of voters, but at the end of the day, it should not have been the United States money to give out in the first place. You know what I mean? That's like it's basically like stealing from them to give to families in the United States just for some political points. It should have all gone to the people of Afghanistan, and of course the pullout from Afghanistan was flawed from the beginning. Trump basically all but assured that the Taliban would retake power because he literally crafted a deal where those high-ranking Taliban officials would be released from prison. And if anybody wants to try correcting me on that, okay, you can, get at me in the comments or whatever, or you could wag your finger at me online somewhere, but I'm pretty sure that part of the deal for the U.S. pullout from Afghanistan involved releasing some key Taliban figures, and that was sort of a stupid idea. But anyway, continuing my analysis of Joe Biden's flaws, there is, yes, I am actually going to get into it a little bit, the Hunter Biden scandal and alleged political nepotism. So, yes, this scandal was definitely overblown, and yes, it was hypocritical for Republicans to latch onto it like they did, and like they still will try to do to distract from whatever scandals they're participating in. But nevertheless, Hunter Biden's business dealings in Ukraine and China during Biden's presidency raised concerns about corruption and influence peddling. And there may have been some legitimacy to some of those concerns. It might have merited some investigation. Republicans accused the Bidens of using political connections for personal gain, which of course Republicans never do, wink wink. But no direct criminal charges emerged. But during that whole, ongoing campaign of, smearing the Biden family, what they call the Biden crime family, that there is nevertheless some further analysis that could be done. I think the basic premise exemplifies the inherent corruption of political families and the revolving door between government and business. I think that basic element has been laid bare, that there is sort of a revolving door between government and business. So a lot of people, when they look at the Trump family or whatever, they're like, "Oh, it's a good thing he's in power because he's a successful businessman." Well, putting aside all of the failures that he had as a businessman, it's still questionable to have successful business people in positions of government because, well, what do you know? They're going to use their power to make it so that their businesses might be able to scam more people and get away with more things and pollute the environment more and treat workers in a more crappy manner because they can deregulate and get more tax cuts and all that kind of stuff. So eventually, the tax burden will be shifted entirely onto the working poor and, to some degree, the middle class, while the upper echelons of the economy, the super rich, have far less of the tax burden. As I've noted many times on this podcast and in some of my blog entries, the the biggest scandal, or one of the biggest scandals, is that even though a lot of these Republicans act as if they're tax abolitionists or something like that, they're not. They actually just want to shift the tax burden entirely onto the non-rich, because most of these people, despite you know depicting themselves as radical and cool and all hip or whatever, they're actually just wanting to not have the rich share the burden, and they want to pursue what is sometimes called a flat tax or a national sales tax, which means that ordinary Americans are going to end up paying, a much steeper price because they won't be able to afford the national sales tax as much. You know, that's really one of the scandals as far as that goes. And don't believe these Republicans when they try to sound all hip and cool and all that stuff. And when it comes to all these cutbacks in government and scrapping programs, for one thing, it's done in such a sloppy manner, and they're not really keeping in mind the full brunt of the consequences of their firings and the closing down of these departments. But even putting that aside, there's a simple fact that they're not going to replace these things with anything better. they're going to mess up the education department, but they're not going to put something better in place. They're going to be like these far right religious indoctrination centers, basically, where you're going to have children who are going to be learning that Trump is some divine leader, like Kim Jong Un or something like that. Some flawless God king who just can't do anything wrong, and it's a freaky prospect. And then when you get into the issues of business and government, uh, when it comes to what the kids are going to learn, they're going to learn that American businesses are amazing, and that the government, the almighty majestic American flag, represents freedom, and that's all you're going to need to learn. You're not going to need to learn about the actual history of the country, the nuances, the scandals, the like you're probably not going to learn about Iran Contra or the flaws of all these Republican administrations. Is just going to be kissing ass to the Republican Party if these far right extremists have their way, and they're going to teach children that only Christianity is the light in the way or whatever. You can only succeed in life if you're adhering to the MAGA worldview, and that's a bit of a problem, But going back to Biden and his son, while nepotism and cronyism aren't exceptions in representative democracy, they're actually features. So I reject the notion that replacing one ruling family with another will necessarily bring justice, and I recognize that power breeds corruption regardless of party. It's just that some political parties are more openly corrupt than others. So, uh, for the sixth point in my analysis of Joe Biden, I'm going to look at the environmental betrayal aspect, or the fossil fuel expansion. Now, the standards are set pretty low, so you can say that Joe Biden was better for the environment than, the current administration and some previous ones for sure. But nevertheless, it's scandalous that despite climate pledges, Biden's administration approved massive fossil fuel projects, including the Willow Project in Alaska. These actions contradict promises to address the climate crisis, and they ensure some continued environmental destruction. And Trump is just going to run with that even further, of course. He's going to keep that ball rolling for sure. But state backed environmental destruction serves the interests of capital. So that's why Biden was not quite so on board with anything like the Green New Deal. Biden's betrayal of climate commitments illustrates that the state prioritizes economic growth over planetary survival. So many see ecological collapse as a consequence of capitalism and the state's unwillingness to confront its own complicity. And I I will be accused of both sidesing it here, but I mean, what can you say? There is some element of both sidesism to this issue. Um, so I'm not trying to claim that the two parties are exactly the same, but Biden is a symptom, not the disease. He's he's not an aberration. He's the predictable product of a system designed to uphold power, control, and exploitation, whether it's natural resources or people. His policies reinforced state violence, imperialism, and corporate domination, proving that any sort of true liberation cannot be achieved primarily through electoral means, especially when the electoral means are so limited. So, real change requires dismantling certain oppressive policies, not simply managing them. And that's one of the things I think we're going to be finding out in the coming years. I am glad that Bernie Sanders and AOC are out there galvanizing some support. I do think that's important, and I'm not trying to sidestep that. But at the same time, this is going to have to be bigger than mere electoral politics. And that's something that Bernie and AOC themselves are pointing out. So credit to them. But at the same time, let the recent years demonstrate that this cannot simply be about electoral politics. You know, this is going to require people to actually spread information and to remain active. And at some times, sure, having some electoral victories, you're also going to have to choose the right candidates and you're going to have to apply the correct types of pressure. So, right now, the pressure on Elon Musk is definitely having some success. It's even apparently causing him to back down ever so slightly in certain ways because these types of people don't want you to know it, but they actually are vulnerable. They can hide behind their wealth and their certain amount of power, but at the end of the day, it's people who give these people power, and they can actually take it away. So, yeah, that's about all I have to say about these people for now. I hope I hope you enjoyed the episodes, and I really didn't mean for this to become a two-part episode, but like I said, I had that coughing spell, and I think it was a good idea to just break the episode up anyway. So I should be back at this another for another episode next week, and sometime in the upcoming weeks, I should finally have a co-host, and that could be exciting. It'll probably make the show a little more interesting and exciting. I know some people like that back and forth, that banter between more than one voice. So that alone might make my show a little bit better. I guess we'll see how it works out. But anyway, have a good one.